Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. My name is Nichelle Campbell-Miller, and I am here with you live with WSSN News. Here shortly, you will receive a video of the one and only Whitney Moore Young Jr. He will talk about his life experiences and what he has done that was influential in the social work community and in the United States. We look forward to hearing from you guys, the feedback that you will give us on the discussion board. Ladies and gentlemen, good night. Hello, everyone. I go by the name of Whitney Moore Young Jr. I was born on July 31st, 1921 in Lincoln Ridge, Kentucky, to my mother, Laura Ray Young, and my father, Whitney Young Sr. I was the middle child of three. I had an older sister named Arnita and a younger sister named Eleanor. Growing up, my father was an educator and my mother was a postal worker. My parents were very influential when it came to teaching my sisters and I what it meant to take pride in being Black and how to stand up and stand out against discrimination. I spent my childhood going to boarding school that my father was the principal of. During my childhood, segregation was alive and well, but I had really little experiences with racism and segregation at that time because the school I attended had mostly African American and white teachers that worked side by side every day, and that was the norm. I attended Kentucky State College and graduated in 1941, receiving my Bachelor's of Science. While attending college, I met Miss Margaret Buckner. Margaret was beautiful and smart, and I ended up marrying her senior year at Kentucky State when I came home for a 5-day pass in 1944. After I graduated, I spent some time in World War II working in an anti-aircraft company of African American soldiers with white officers. After my experiences in the military, I took a real interest to civil rights. I realized that America was not as it was depicted in my childhood. When I got out of the military, I graduated and earned my Master's of Social Work at the University of Minnesota in 1947. I worked in academia from 1954 to 1960. Among the timeline, I served as the Dean of the Atlanta University School of Social Work. I worked vigorously in the National Association of the Advancement of Colored People, also known as the NAACP, and was named the Executive Director of the National Urban League from 1960 to 1971. Throughout my career as an executive director of the National Urban League, I worked to end employment discrimination in the United States. The 60s were a trying time for Black people. Tensions were always high, and this great nation was under great scrutiny and turmoil. I was there on the front lines when African American people fought tirelessly to get even half the treatment that white people got. Leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X disagreed with my methods because they felt like I was working for the white man. I was often threatened and called names like Uncle Tom because my philosophy was not to march, protest, be violent, rather to use my knowledge of politics and business to effectively create change. I believe strongly in the ability to build the bridge between those groups of people because that was the way I felt I could make some real change. I do, however, realize that it was a team effort and collectively we worked to better the United States. We had white people who didn't know how to address the issues at hand, and on the other hand, we had Black people fighting for the right to a life in white America and be afforded the same liberties. There were not many that in those positions of power that felt they needed to help change the system, but I had some of the most important ones as my allies. It was very evident when I would visit these communities that there was a clear gap in access to resources and equal rights for all people, and I knew I had to do something. I used my platform to do so. Oftentimes, I would watch different businesses and the lack of representation among the Black community, and I found it very unsettling. There were times when I would speak to store owners and encourage them to hire people of color to boost their sales. I did this for a long time. African American peoples needed employment, and that's how I helped them to gain employment. I was instrumental in shifting the National Urban League from a rather unassertive civil rights organization into one that was passionately fighting for equal access for Blacks who had been marginalized and discriminated against. During my time as executive director, I increased the budget of the organization and helped create thousands of new jobs for African American people. I took the annual budget from $325,000 to over $6 million and helped to grow the staff from a mere 36 people to roughly 1,000 employees. I felt strongly that it was more important to maintain communication with America's centers of financial and political powers, no matter how race relations might be in the nation's streets and schools. When in reality, I worked as the bridge between the white power structure and the Black community. It was important that we realize that it's not about Black power or white power, rather the power of the ballots in the ballot box. We had to elect people who were willing to see what Black people were fighting for and provide them with equal opportunities. All I was asking was for white people to give the same efforts they did to exclude Negroes to be used to include Negroes in the mainstream of American life. I was one of the most significant leaders in the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom and a member of the legendary Big Six Civil Rights Leadership Team. The six of us used the National Urban League headquarters office in New York for meetings to coordinate the march, and it only took us about 3 months. The March on Washington drew out people from all different walks of life. I have never seen this many people in one place at one time. People came from near and far to support the cause and to fight for equal rights for Black people. I remember very vividly the day. It was hot. I saw people far beyond the horizon. That was the day that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech that resonated with the entire United States, the world, in fact. I remember marching hand in hand with other influential leaders fighting for equal rights. It was really a dream. After the march, I advocated for federal assistance to cities combating poverty. I developed the Domestic Marshall Plan to work as a strategy for contesting poverty and close the wealth gap between Blacks and whites. I worked closely with President Johnson and provided advice for the war on poverty. I've written 2 books. To Be Equal in 1964 and Beyond Racism was published in 1969. In 1968, President Johnson's administration presented me with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And then on March 11th, 1971, I took my last breath as I drowned while swimming with some friends in Nigeria. I will leave you all with this. I'm not anxious to be the loudest voice or the most popular, but I would like to think that at a crucial moment, I was an effective voice of the voiceless and effective hope of the hopeless. Thank you guys for having me here today.